Strongly. Let's talk about the political fallout right now. Remember, this is in the middle of a political campaign. Dan, he was clearly appealing to a big chunk, not only of the Republican conservative base, but the American public right now, which is sick and tired of the United States going around the world, spending, as he says, trillions of dollars, losing thousands of lives, building, nation building in other parts of the world, while so much of the U.S. infrastructure is crumbling.
All I was thinking about listening to him was the evolution of the Republican Party, in the form of the standard bearer, whether it was the Republican president, George W. Bush, who I covered in the run-up and during the Iraq War, to John McCain, who was the next nominee, Mitt Romney maybe a little bit less so, but how much things have changed for various reasons with regard to the approach that the Republican base clearly wants its leadership to take. Because George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, obviously, they were all about, as he said, trying to not necessarily nation build, but democratize. And they were all about trying to get democracies in the Middle East, insisting that history will prove them right. And maybe it's messy now, but in 30 years it'll be okay. To where we are now with Donald Trump saying, that's a terrible idea. Who are we to enforce that kind of will? And by the way, instead of spending all that time, money, blood, treasure over there, we need to be focusing more on making ourselves great again. And it just, again, just strikes me as if I had a time machine and put myself back covering the George W. Bush White House in 2002, 2003, he would have been laughed out of, of the country, basically, by anybody who considered themselves a real Republican.
His basic point, though, Gloria, was America first right now. Yeah. And that's the theme. He's laid out his vision, and it may not necessarily be attractive to all the think tankers, the elite foreign policy establishment here in Washington, but for the public at large, here in the United States, the vision he laid out is going to resonate.
Well, I think the think tankers would agree with America first. It's just that they would engage and describe it differently. One thing that struck me about Donald Trump was him saying we have to be unpredictable starting right now. And, you know, everybody who runs for president is a reaction to the current president. And the rap on this president is that he is too predictable because he wants to engage, negotiate. He's talked about constructive engagement since he first ran for the presidency. And, you know, the sense about Barack Obama is that he is too willing to negotiate, not willing enough to walk away from the table as Donald Trump was talking about. So what he is saying is, I'm not going to be predictable. In a way, I understand what he's saying, but that isn't going to give any comfort to your allies who would like somebody they know can be a predictable ally. I get what he's saying as a negotiator, but as a leader of a country, there's a question about
He made the point, Nia, repeatedly, and he made the point once again today. If the U.S. is going to deploy 50 or 250 or 1,000 troops to Syria or Iraq, don't make big announcements. Just do it. Get the job done. Don't give your adversary, don't give your enemy all the information they need to target these American troops. Go ahead and just do it and get the job done. Bring them home as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and that's something you have often sort of armchair pundits, talk show hosts, and folks in Congress as well. You know, in some ways I thought much of this speech was sort of boilerplate, you know, put America first, blaming Obama for being feckless, protecting the veterans. He talked about rebuilding the military, but also wanting to save money while doing it. But there was that moment when he essentially said, to hell with all of you foreign policy experts in Washington. Including you, Mike Rogers.
I felt very hurt by that.
Yeah, none of you guys have gotten us to where we need to be on the world stage, and we need new voices and we need new vision, and I'm here, Donald Trump, to articulate that, and I think Dan is exactly right. I mean, the difference between even Mitt Romney, right, and Donald Trump. Mitt Romney saying the biggest geopolitical foe is Russia, right. And Donald Trump here saying, you know, I can work work with Russia. In some ways, he is parroting Hillary Clinton, who said, let's reset this relationship. So a lot there, I think, a lot to chew on, a lot for people to like.
Bring in Fred Flake, one of our senior international correspondents, who is listening very carefully. Fred, I assume people all over the world were listening. They're intrigued by Donald Trump, and I assume a lot of foreign leaders, international leaders around the world, are beginning to take him much more seriously now that he is potentially poised to be the Republican presidential nominee. What's the likely reaction in Moscow, for example, to his reaching out saying, I want to work with the Russians, also to the Chinese, I want to work with the Chinese, but they're going to have to work with us as well?
Yeah, it's interesting, Wolf, and I think after hearing this speech by Donald Trump, the Russians most likely are going to be, well, almost ecstatic by what they heard, because on the one hand, he said, yes, he wants better relations with the Russians. He believes that something like friendship is actually possible. And then on the other hand, he really didn't point out anything that he believes that the Russians need to do to actually get there, like, for instance, mentioning the situation in eastern Ukraine and possible political movement there, possible movement on the Minsk agreement to try and get things on track there. So certainly no mention of that at all. And I can tell you, Wolf, I was out earlier today on the streets of Moscow here, and I was querying people about the presidential candidates. And literally everybody that we spoke to here in Moscow on the streets likes Donald Trump and wants Donald Trump to become president, because they believe that Donald Trump would mesh well with Vladimir Putin. Both of them have shown admiration for each other, have made very positive statements about each other. It's interesting. There's a poll that was done of G20 nations, and in every single G20 nation polled, people there said that they believed Hillary Clinton would make the best president, except in Russia, where Donald Trump is ahead by a landslide. So he certainly has a lot of admirers here, and statements like the one he made today in that speech will certainly do a lot to fortify that position. It's one of the things that the Russians have been talking about again and again and again. They feel that they're being singled out by the West. They believe the West should drop their sanctions. They believe the West should work more closely with Russia on foreign policy, specifically on fighting terrorism. And one of the things that Trump said in his speech is he said the Russians themselves have also witnessed the horrors of international terrorism. Therefore, he believes that there could be a mutual understanding there. I think there's going to be a very positive reception to the things that Donald Trump said in his speech about Russia here in Moscow, specifically in the Kremlin tonight, Wolf.
Interesting. I want to go to CNN's Senior Latin American Affairs editor Rafael Romo, who's joining us right now. Rafael, it was very interesting. He spoke about strengthening the borders. He spoke about immigration. He spoke about making America secure and all of that. Did you hear anything specific about the wall and that Mexico would pay for it?
Well, that's the thing, Will. For the last few months, we've heard Donald Trump talk about building a wall with Mexico, making Mexico pay for the wall, blocking money transfers to Mexico, deporting 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. And this time around, when he had the ears of the world expecting him to detail his plan, he chose to say very, very little about it. He only made a passing reference to immigrants, but only in terms of terrorism, and he didn't seem to talk specifically about immigrants from Mexico or from Latin America. As you can imagine, Wolf, there's great concern in Mexico as to what a Trump presidency would look like, especially because Mexico is the U.S.'s third largest trade partner. There's a trade between these two countries that is over $500 billion every year. There are 34 million people of Mexican origin living in the United States. There are 1 million Americans living in Mexico. There are 20 million American tourists who visit Mexico every year. And when Trump was talking about Mexico today, there was absolutely nothing as to how he would handle this relationship. Wolf, about the only thing that some Mexicans may have in common with Trump is the fact that he has denounced what he calls lousy trade agreements with other countries. A lot of Mexicans feel very uneasy about what NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, has meant for Mexico, feeling that it has made Mexican companies compete against larger, better funded American companies, and they have lost their businesses, and it has also cost not only the United States but also Mexico a lot of jobs. But I was expecting to hear probably a little bit more about the wall and how he would finance it. I didn't hear like that today, Wolf.
Yeah, very interesting. What was said was critically important in outlining his strategy. What also was not said may be significant as well. Raphael